Player One, welcome to the Gaming History Club. My name is Gabby.
Hello, and I'm JP. Last time we discussed bootleg consoles, 8-bit machines pretending to ray trace, but now it's time to look at the illegal, bizarre, and misspelled world of bootlegged video games.
Okay, so JP, you said last time you didn't have any experience with bootleg consoles. Have you ever played bootleg games?
No. So, this doesn't make me an expert on the matter, clearly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But as we can tell already from the previous episode, yeah, we naturally aren't like the target audience for these bootleg games and consoles, right? If you can hear Chow Chow, by the way, that's because he's now a permanent member of the recording studio.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
because he likes being here now for some bizarre reasons.
Yeah.
But no, that's not strictly true. I mean, I don't actually have any experience with bootleg games, but I have a feeling my childhood was full of like pirated games.
Yeah. So that's very close to bootleg games, pirate games. I mean, the closest I've come to bootlegged video games is I think I did have a multi-card for the Game Boy from one of my friends. And that also had a very similar thing on it where you put it in and you have a list of like hundreds and hundreds of games, but after a while you realize, no, it's just the same, few games repeated over and over,
Again. Yeah.
with slightly different titles. So I guess I did come kind of close to it in a way.
Well, okay, let's get into bootleg video game. To be fair, compared to bootleg consoles, bootleg video games are a little easier to pin down, but they do still get mixed up with some other type of games, and there are a few different boxes we can sort them into. But here's the simple definition. A bootleg video game is an unlicensed game that steals from an existing property. Basically, it infringes on copyrights, trademarks, or patents of an already established game.
Yeah, so basically, if you make a game where Pikachu drives the Batmobile and collects Mario's mushrooms, well, congratulations, you've made a bootleg video game. And yes, even if you did give it away for free, it's still illegal. Now, here's where it gets tricky though. Bootlegs often do get confused with two other types of video games. So first is the unlicensed video games, and these are original games, but they are released without permission from the console makers. So back in the early 80s, this wasn't actually a huge deal. But when the US game market crashed under a flood of really badly made, cheap, low quality titles, companies like Nintendo started to crack down. And from then on, if you wanted your game on their system, you needed actually to get a license from them to release your video game. So, second of all, they're also not quite pirated games. So these aren't new creations, they're just copies. Like burning a PlayStation disc onto a blank CD. That is piracy and not a bootleg.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm more familiar with. Being from Indonesia, by the way, because I've seen a lot of that.
Really? A lot? A lot of that in Indonesia?
Kind of, yeah. I mean,
Oh,
like, you'll see a lot of these. So they basically, like, burn cracked games into CDs and sell it to people for
nice.
quite cheap,
Nice.
basically. Yeah, so I think that's what I'm more familiar with, as I mentioned before. But anyway, that's our starting point. So bootlegs are their own strange little category, sitting awkwardly between piracy and unlicensed work with some wild examples we're gonna get into. And yeah, they're truly pretty wild.
Wild indeed.
So if we're talking about the types of bootleg games, we can mostly break them down into two main types. The first one is bootleg ports. The name kind of give it away. This is when a game is rebuilt from scratch and dropped onto another console, usually without permission. Well, actually, mostly without permission.
Almost
In this
always
case, yeah.
without permission, indeed. So sometimes this is a backwards jump. So you take a game from newer hardware and you're squeezing it into something older. A classic example here is Super Mario World. Obviously, this is a original flagship title for the Super Nintendo. But thanks to a Taiwanese dev group called Hummer Team, there's a version of Super Mario World that runs on the NES. And don't worry, we'll come back to this example later because, yeah, this is a pretty cool gem to talk about.
But it's not always backwards either, though. Sometimes it's also sideways. So imagine booting up a Sega Mega Drive and seeing Mario bouncing around. It's weird, right? But that's exactly what happened with Super Mario World 64. It's a strange port of this SNES game made to run on Sega hardware.
Yeah, it's annoying having to use the titles of the names they gave these bootleg video games because we're saying like Super Mario World 64, and in your head you're like thinking, oh, the Nintendo 64 game, but no, obviously it's not that, but they're doing this on purpose to get you to buy the bootleg game, right?
Yeah, it's like confusing on
It
purpose.
is confusing, but we'll try our best to explain. The important thing to understand here is these aren't hacked cartridges or simple copies, though. They're full recreations. So someone sat down and redrew the Mona Lisa, if you like, but with a pencil on sketch paper. Okay, so that was bootleg ports. Now let's talk about the other main type of bootleg video game. So that would be bootleg hacks. And bootleg hacks is where someone takes an existing video game and they crack it open and they hack it. They start tinkering with it. So, how much they change the game, that varies a lot. Obviously, they can change just smaller things like adding some cheats, if you will, swapping out sprites and make them look like different characters from different video games, sometimes from a completely different franchise, even. And other times, it's a much more big scale change where almost everything is changed about the game and only the original code skeleton is actually left over. So let me give you an example here. Super Mario and Sonic 2. Sonic spelled with a K at the end. So this looks like a strange Mario Sonic crossover, but this game is actually just the original Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers 2 for the NES and Famicom that was released back in 1993. Only this time, Chip and Dale have been swapped out for Mario and a slightly off model looking Sonic. So this is less like drawing Mona Lisa with a pencil on sketch paper, and this is more like cutting out Mario's face and gluing it over the original Mona Lisa.
Yeah, from a badly drawn magazine,
Yes.
basically. But yeah, here's the interesting part though. Bootleg hacks often get compared to ROM hacks. These two are kind of like cousins, but very different reputations, to be honest. ROM hacks are usually fan projects, and they're much more transparent about what they are, and they aren't sold to people. They even feature in game disclaimers that if you paid for this game, you've been scammed. So, yeah, ROM hacks aim to honor the spirit of the original game while adding new challenges, stories, or mechanics.
Yeah, so an example for ROM hack is Pokemon, and Pokemon has like many, many, many different ROM hacks. Some versions crank up the difficulty, and others completely make new quests in the game, and a few have like darker themes, and they'll explore things like humans, exploiting Pokemon, like enslaving them rather than living alongside them peacefully, as is, the case in the, original games. But at their core, all these ROM hacks, they still try to stay true to the heart of the franchise.
Yep, so while bootleg hacks are basically unauthorized knockoffs, ROM hacks are closer to passionate fan projects, basically. And I guess that would be good for an episode on itself,
Yeah.
possibly.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So before we dive into specific games and the developers behind them, let's first talk a little bit about the common traits you tend to see in bootlegs. Now, on surface level, I'll be honest, especially me, I'm very easily impressed by these. You're seeing a 16-bit game squeezed onto an 8-bit console, for example. And that takes some technical wizardry, honestly. But once you've actually played them for a little while, these games are notorious for being, well, just really, really bad, if I'm being honest. They lack polish, the refinement and balance of originals, basically.
Yeah, but with that said, though, there was sometimes still a spark of passion somewhere in the game that you can find. Some of these developers clearly had talent and imagination, possibly in another timeline, in another universe, With the right opportunities, they might have been making legitimate classics. But the reality of bootleg business model was much less romantic because at its core it was about tricking people more than love of video games on itself. So they tried to pass off cheap knockoffs as the real deal or as sequels that never actually existed.
So you would see titles like Super Mario World on the NES, a console that it was never meant for in the first place, or games labeled Mario Brothers 4, 5, 6, and 7, none of which are, real games. They didn't exist. So the idea is simple, cash in on unsuspecting buyers who thought they were getting something genuine from Nintendo or Sega.
And this wasn't a new trick either. The whole thing kind of remind us about the Atari crash during the early 80s, basically, when the market was flooded with low effort games rushed out to the world just because they're new games and thinking people would just buy it, get excited about it. When consumers started playing it, apparently they're just bad. So, people just stopped trusting video games altogether
They
around that time.
they definitely took advantage of people not being able to like test or play the game until they got home and then realizing that, oh wait, okay, this game ET is actually like really really bad and I paid god knows how many dollars for it. But the truth is, this still happens even nowadays. Publishers will occasionally still make like this big name onto like a barely finished product, hoping enough people will buy from that brand recognition alone. So if we need a recent example, Skull Island Rise of Kong. Enough said.
Not enough said because there is Gollum as well.
Ah, yes, I forgot about Gollum. But anyway, back to bootleg pods. Bootleg pods really took off on older hardware, especially in parts of the world where the official consoles weren't affordable or perhaps even available. So if you think back to our previous episode on Famiclones, those unofficial NES clones like the Dandy in Russia and Belarus or the Little Tyrant from China. So while players in the West were moving on to the latest generation of consoles, these systems actually kept the 8-bit era alive. So once the novelty of the normal NES games wore off, the demand for something new gave rise to bootleg ports.
Yes, so you'd have 16-bit, even 32-bit games being squashed down to run on an 8-bit machine. The results were, well, as you can probably tell,
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah. Choppy animations, cut down levels, simplified music, or probably actually broken music, I might say, and also broken physics. Whatever it took to make the game fakely resemble the real thing. Sometimes characters were traced or copied, but other times they were just redrawn from memory, with hilarious results. I mean, you'd see Mario with freakishly long legs, for example, or
Ugh.
Pikachu looking like a yellow rat in sunglasses. Like fair enough, but man, it can get pretty bad.
Yeah, like very bad. It's not cute anymore.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes you'll see it on like the box art, Ryu from Street Fighter facing off against a Gundam, for example. It's like,
That wouldn't happen.
yeah, what are you talking about?
That Gundam would completely kick Rio's butt, let's be honest here. Come on.
Yeah, I know, right?
That
Yeah.
Hadoukens aren't going to do anything against a full-on Gundam. And of course, the games were a glitchy mess. So we had the flickering sprites, the constant crashing, and that unmistakable jank that somehow became part of their charm anyway. So add in the wonky translations, of course, with the classic "Congratulations, you have successed in game beating," and yeah, you've got a recipe for comedy gold. But these flaws gave bootleg games a strange kind of cult status. They were bad, yes, but bad in a way that made them memorable, collectible, and perfect meme material, kind of like Alone in the Dark, the movie.
The movie or the game?
Well, if it was Street Fighter, you could have Street Fighter, the movie, the game, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, it's one thing to talk about bootleg games, but it's another thing entirely to actually have to play them. And honestly, they're like stepping into a parallel universe.
I know, right? The uncanny valley of gaming. You kind of recognize it, but everything's just wrong.
Yeah, so let's go through our top 6 most infamous bootleg games. Buckle up, player one. First up, we've got Somari. Imagine Sonic the Hedgehog, but instead of Sonic, it's actually Mario.
With Sonic speed.
Yes, except that on the NES, it couldn't quite handle Sonic's speed, let's say. So it's more like Mario on roller skates inside of a swimming pool.
So basically unresponsive, glitchy, cursed in general.
Yes, precisely. If Somari jumps from full speed, for example, he will all of a sudden just slow down to a walking pace, and that makes the game completely awkward to control and very frustrating. You can't control yourself whilst you're doing that rolling dash that Sonic does, and those classic loop-de-loops that Sonic goes around and right, you can actually just get permanently stuck in those, and yeah, just get stuck there, and nothing happens. But my favorite is the special stage is misspelled as spatial stage.
As in with A.
Yes, as in spatial. If you think about it too, for kids in Russia or China, this may have been their first Sonic game, but they may have never realized that, Mario was supposed to be a blue hedgehog and not Somari.
But Mario is not a blue hedgehog.
Exactly. And this game doesn't belong on the NES either.
Yeah, but what's interesting as well is that hacks were made based on this bootleg somehow. So we're talking bootlegs of bootlegs?
Yeah, that's a lot of legs and a lot of boots, isn't it? But yeah, you'll like this. The most extensive hack actually replaces Somari with Doraemon.
My favorite.
Yeah, right?
Oh.
So Somari might just be the most infamous of all bootleg games. So yeah, definitely check this one out, Player One, when you have time to do so.
So yes, Somari was definitely pretty big in the bootleg universe, right? And they were made by Hummer Team, which was based in Taiwan. And the second game we will talk about is also by Hummer Team, actually, and they strike again with Super Mario World, but for the NES.
Yeah, that's like trying to shove a wedding cake into a lunchbox.
Yeah, that's kind of a perfect metaphor for this. They somehow rebuilt an entire SNES game for a weaker 8-bit hardware. So you've got Yoshi, the fire and cape power ups, and a soundtrack that sounds like someone humming Mario music badly into a tin can. That's the
Is,
best way I can
is
say.
that why they were called the Hummer Team?
Because they like humming.
Into tin cans to make the music, recreate the music.
Could be.
Yeah, but all joking aside, it is actually quite impressive, though, to be fair. It's almost like a love letter, an illegal love letter, if you will. So, according to Hummer Cheng, who is the main guy behind the Hummer team, this was the hardest game for the team to develop, and it actually took them upwards of a year to make.
Yeah, and there were many things that were changed, left out, or just different from the original. But as a whole package, it is really impressive, at least visually, because of how similar it is to the original SNES version. So yeah, I found myself really interested in this game, to be honest.
Another angle to look at it from is if you think of the timelines that we have here in the the bootlegged world and the less bootlegged world, if you will. So this game came out in 1995, right? So the PlayStation 1 will have already been out, and it's just 1 year away for us to get the Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. But elsewhere in the world, where these games are, very, very expensive for reasons that we covered in the previous episode, they are playing bootlegged game versions of the previous generation on consoles that were 2 generations old at this point. That's crazy, right? If you think about it
Everything's
that way.
confusing here.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, we're playing PlayStation 5, but elsewhere in the world, they're playing PlayStation 4 games on a PlayStation 3.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be a really good example. So that is crazy, really.
but we're not done yet. Let's head into a darker territory. Hong Kong 97.
Ah, no. This one's with Bruce Lee's relative, right?
Yeah, if you can call it that. Yeah, it's kind of a surreal, offensive, and violent game that's part parody and part political protest, if you will. So it scrolls endlessly. You fight hordes of enemies, and the whole time, this annoying 6-second music loop drills into your brain again and again.
And again.
Yes. So this game is so bad, it sometimes also gets named as the worst game of all time.
So this game was designed by a Japanese journalist going under the alias of Kowloon Kurosawa with the help of a programmer from Enix, nonetheless though. And they made it in just 2 days, which you can totally tell, and it was just made to mock Nintendo's quality standards.
Yeah, and it got some pretty naughty language in the game, so we won't get into it because, we have a clean, family friendly podcast, I would say. But yeah, we can tell you that it's very anti communist.
You play as Chin, who's supposed to be Bruce Lee's relative, but guess what? Chin is actually just a picture of Jackie Chan from the movie Wheels on Meals. In the game, you die if you just get hit by one thing of the super many things that are shooting at you. And honestly, I'm not gonna go too much into the gameplay because let me tell you, it's just very, very, very bad. And honestly, I refuse to talk any more about the gameplay. If you want to see it for yourself, feel free to do so. But let me tell you, it is just very, very bad. One thing to mention though, this game was never published in any official capacity. So the developer would actually just mail this game out per order from his own house, basically.
Nice. Home business.
Home business. So let's bring things back a little bit into the fun side. How about Kart Fighter? So this one was also actually made by the Hummer team, and it's Street Fighter 2, but with Mario characters.
It's weird, yeah, I know, but surprisingly, it also works. So you will have combos, special moves, characters with unique sprites, and it even has 5 different difficulty levels. So they clearly thought this out.
Yeah, this is one bootleg that does actually gain quite a bit of credit despite its bootleg nature. I'm willing to hazard a guess it is actually working so well because they did use a slightly altered version of the Street Fighter 2 engine though. But yeah, you do have all 8 characters that were also in the original Mario Kart NES game. And yeah, honestly, you got Bowser firing out Hadoukens. It's crazy.
Do you think this is what inspired Nintendo to make Super Smash Bros?
Ooh.
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably not.
Perhaps.
Who
Perhaps not.
knows?
But was Bowser also firing Hadoukens at a Gundam?
Hmm. That will make a cool box art, but hey. But yeah, let's mix it up a bit now. We spoke about Hummer Team's games, and for good reason, because they did make many games, and some of the most infamous in the bootleg world. Now it's time to look at something from Venezuela. Crazy Bus.
Ah, yes, the bus simulator. That's more like a surrealist art project.
Yeah, so you basically drive a brightly colored bus across an endless road. There is no real end goal, and the soundtrack, if you can call it a soundtrack, is literally just a barrage of chaotic atonal noise. So yeah, I mean, people stream it today just to laugh at how awful it is. That's just how bad this one is.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that makes you not question the game itself, but why you are even alive at this point.
Why do I exist?
Yeah,
So yeah, the game was developed by Tom Scripps, originally created as a tech demo made for the Sega Genesis until some unknown people decided to put it on a ROM cartridge, complete with a manual and a box art, released it on us poor people.
I can just imagine them snickering in the background, like, wouldn't it be funny if we released this really bad tech demo as a real game? Anyway, Crazy Bus is another game that likes fighting for the title of the worst game ever made, so at least we can say it's successful in that regard. And as a curious novelty game, it does also get reviewed on YouTube a fair amount by, amongst, nonetheless, also the Angry Video Game Nerd who reviewed Crazy Bus, but also Hong Kong 97. So we'll leave a link in the description if you've missed those 2 legendary episodes, Player One.
And finally, we come to the last one, which probably is my favorite out of all of them, actually. Biohazard. This one is a Resident Evil, but made for the NES in the year 2003. Yeah, you heard that right. NES in 2003. Basically, when the NES was long dead by then.
So, this game was a Chinese bootleg developed by Mars Production that reimagines the PlayStation survival horror classic, but on 8 bit hardware. But what's really amazing is the eye for detail that the developers had when recreating this game. So, you might remember the opening video sequence from Resident Evil. So, that was originally video, right? But it's fully recreated in sprite art.
So I guess in a way that's already doing a lot more than many other bootlegs.
Yes, and it follows the original script very, very closely. You do only get to play as Jill, however, but honestly, like there's so much that actually resembles the PlayStation original. Pressing start brings up a menu that looks exactly like the original. To save, you need to pick up an ink ribbon and use the typewriter. Even the puzzles that you need to solve and the map layouts are roughly just like in the original, but in 2D, of course. It's surprisingly faithful.
So the main difference is in the battle system. That one was lifted from Resident Evil Gaiden on Game Boy Color, giving combat a handheld flavor. It aligns perfectly in spirit with Resident Evil though, because everything is still within the original Resident Evil spirit, basically, right?
Yeah, it stays true to the original source, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, are they illegal? Absolutely, but it is still weirdly impressive. But now it's time to pull back the curtain a little. We've been talking about what these bootlegs look like, but how on earth were they actually made? After all, Nintendo and Sega weren't exactly handing out development kits to unauthorized programmers in Taiwan or Venezuela.
Most of these games were born out of reverse engineering, which you can think of like doing detective work. The programmers would take apart an existing cartridge, they would look at how the code was structured, and then try to replicate or reuse parts of that programming code. They had no official tools, no manuals, it was purely from raw skill, trial and error, and usually a team of very underpaid developers.
And probably a lot of coffee, I'm guessing.
Definitely, yeah. Probably more sugar than coffee. The Hummer team, famous for Sumari and Super Mario World on the NES, they were experts at this reverse engineering. They could take characters from one system, like Sonic from the Genesis, and squeeze them onto the more limited NES hardware. And that's why it's not surprising that the results were often this, junky physics, the odd music conversions that sounded like humming into a tin can, and often broken hit detection, but still, playable, I suppose. Which is remarkable considering how much they actually had to cut down to squeeze these games into, different consoles.
Yeah, so they were unofficial DMAX before DMAC was even a thing. So yeah, a sort of underground art form, except, highly illegal, of course, and often mass produced for markets where official games weren't available or were way too expensive. Some programmers even recycled code across different bootlegs, and that's why you'll sometimes see identical glitches or sprite behavior popping up in completely unrelated games, like the same weird DNA showing up in distant cousins.
Yeah, and although we did discuss a lot of Hummer Team's, infamous bootleg games, it wasn't just all in Taiwan or Asia. South America had its own underground bootleg scene as well, and especially in Brazil with its clone consoles. Games like Crazy Bus came from local coders experimenting with the Sega Genesis hardware without licenses. And Russia too, of course. You got things like the NES ports of PlayStation games made years after the systems were quote unquote dead. So I suppose in a weird way, bootleggers preserved and transformed games in ways the original developers never would have.
In a lighter sense, they weren't purely illegal and cheap knockoff games. I mean, they are,
Yeah,
but
pretty much.
yeah, but they were also weird, bizarre cultural artifacts in a way. I mean, reverse engineering a console and game is no joke. It takes dedication and skills too.
Let's fast forward to the 2010s now. So, bootleg gaming made a big leap from 8 bit Famiclones over to smartphones. At first, it was kind of slow, but as smartphones became the must have item for everyone to have. And the popularity of the casual games like Fruit Ninja and Angry Birds, when those exploded in popularity, bootleggers quickly followed this trend. The early Apple App Store and Google Play Store were lightly regulated at the start, and this was basically a gold rush for anyone willing to copy a hit game.
But somehow one thing hasn't changed though since the NES days. Nintendo games remain the most bootlegged of all somehow. It's just so popular to be bootlegged. I don't know why. Take the 2012's fake Pokemon Yellow, for example, right? It even briefly hit the top of the App Store charts before Nintendo finally intervened.
Yeah, and then there's of course the flood of Pokemon Go clones that we saw. Fake apps like Pokemon Go Ultimate or Go Catch 'em All appeared almost immediately after the original had launched. And some were locking phones, and others were serving silent ads in the background that you wouldn't actually see. And one Chinese bootleg even earned praise for its slick animations, right? But investigators later discovered it was quietly harvesting user data.
Yeah, it's a common trick among these modern bootlegs that the developers constantly change the game's name and the branding to avoid being removed from the stores.
So, in the end, modern bootleg games are still playing by the same rules as the old ones. They're resilient, kind of parasitic, but strangely inventive too. Just now, instead of flickering sprites on an NES, it's on your smartphone selling your private browsing history for cheap to companies eager to sell you nonsense. But with all that, Player One, I hope you enjoyed this episode and go check some of these games out on YouTube if you haven't experienced them for yourself. It's hilarious and cringy, so have a peek in our episode description.
And as usual, new episodes of Gaming History Club are released every other Wednesday, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Gaming History Club.
Come back in a couple of weeks, Player One, when we discuss politics around video games. See ya.